Welcome to the Public Safety and Veterans Subcommittee. We have call to order. We have Kate Nagel's made. All right, Kate. I thought they said that you might be on the phone, so you're actually here. So thank you. Um, do we have any cards for call to the public? Already, we have items 3 through 6 are consent. No presentations are planned, but however, staff's here to answer any questions. Are there any questions on the consent items?
Yes.
This, oh, sorry.
Go.
Okay, we got-
Councilwoman first.
I have a question on the grant application to the National Crime Gun Intelligence Center Initiative. And it says, this is an interagency collaboration focused on immediate collection, management, and analysis of crime gun evidence such as shell casings in real time to identify shooters, disrupt criminal activity, and prevent future violence. We don't do that now?
The National Gun.
We don't analyze
That's item number
shell?
5.
I mean,
Yes.
how do you do
This
that
isn't-
so quickly that you can find the shooter immediately?
How do we do it so quickly?
Yeah.
Technology.
There's a Councilwoman Stacy Osborne Fry with the Police Department. Part of this grant will allow us to purchase what's called a shot spotter technology. And that technology actually identifies where the shot originated from and allows us to send officers to that location immediately. That is not a technology that we currently have.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
You're
Appreciate it.
welcome. You're welcome. Was there-
So for example, on the, like 4th of July, people are shooting off guns. So
Absolutely.
you can identify which area that shot came from,
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
Right, thank you. Councilmember Gallego?
On the Bureau of Justice Assistance Smart Policing Initiative grant, where are we going to focus our grant application?
That's wonderful. So on the smart policing, we are looking at a actual location-based strategy for crime, and in looking at actually the wanting to make sure that we send officers using not only the automatic vehicle locator technology, but also geographic information system technology to identify a larger, where there's a more prevalence of violent crime, and being able to address that through intelligence-led policing.
And can you speak a little bit more about what the automatic vehicle locating technology?
On our police vehicles, it's tracking. Basically, we're able to track all police vehicles at all times.
So when a call comes out with dispatch, we know where the vehicles are located, and we can send the closest unit, not necessarily just a unit that's in that beat, or that's their beat. They may be on the other side of the beat, and another vehicle is actually closer.
Our mapping system actually displays it.
Right.
Right.
You see every police car, where they're at in close proximity.
So we would be applying for this grant to improve our dispatching?
No, actually what it is to look at hotspots within the city, kind of correlate those to where vehicles are normally at, and also where the geographic information system with the crimes, and be able to actually be a lot more proactive in the distribution of police officers.
Councilmember Pastor?
So how I'm understanding this is when a call, just only because it's so recent for me, when several calls went out, it was a matter of trying to figure out who was the closest to the scene, the crime, and who could get there the fastest. And what I discovered on the ride along is that such a strong geographic area that is covered, you could be on one side, the east side of the map, and a crime happening way on the west side, and there weren't enough police officers in that area because other things were happening on the east side. So I witnessed that. So that's what I'm understanding on how this mapping or this technology would work.
Exactly.
And it would be more efficient
Yes.
in the sense of where to send the calls quickly or get whoever's there in that area.
Yes, ma'am.
The other piece that I discovered was there was several precincts overlapping, And so it was a matter of which kind of like who's there and who can get there faster. So that will be, actually, that would be great, because then we can get there more proactively. And I get it in the hot spots because I was driving in one of my main hot spots and was able to see that dynamic happen firsthand and got a knowledge of it and understanding of how it works. So this would be a great grant for us in our policing.
Councilwoman Pastor and I were both able to attend National League of Cities and get to hear from the Department of Justice about what they hope to accomplish. And they really pushed, they wanted innovative applications that do projects and use technology that is cutting edge and that others aren't using. We think this is,
Yes, absolutely.
in past council reports that we used to get more information about what we were going to apply for the grant, not just that we were going to apply. So I think
So with the timing of public safety and then when these grants are actually announced, we're into maybe a week after it's announced. We have to get it on to public safety, and we may still be attempting to figure out which purpose area we may be going for and what we actually want to purchase. Takes us a little bit longer to put that together, so it's a matter of timing.
fabulous. Maybe we can do better with getting the information we get to you then.
Absolutely.
We get it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Councilmember Williams?
I don't have any more questions. I move approval of the consent items.
Alrighty.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
All those opposed? I just want to thank our staff for keeping up with all the cutting edge technology that's out there. And I know that sometimes grants just have 30 days or 60 days to complete, and these meetings are month long. So thank you for bringing it to our attention as soon as possible. We're on item number 7, update on Police Department's central booking program. We can have the chief come on up. So Chief, this came to our attention because of the cost of our bookings have gone up over the years, and that we were trying to look at other ways of saving money, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Council. I'm here to provide an update on the Police Department Central Booking Program. The Central Booking Program was implemented in June 2010. The reason it was implemented is to streamline the booking process so arresting officers could return back to patrol functions more quickly and avoid some of the lengthy wait hours at MCSO jail. The pilot program was implemented out of the Southern Command Station, which is on Central and Elwood in the south side. The facility was a standing facility, our Southern Command Station. It has 6 holding rooms, and it can accommodate a maximum of 12 prisoners at a time. We put 2 in per holding room. From the inception of the pilot program in 2010 to the end of 2015, there has been approximately 164,000 prisoners have been processed through the central booking detail. It equates to about 75% of all adult arrests made citywide during that period. To enhance some of the program's efficiencies of the booking program, the police department and the municipal court implemented a video initial appearance, IA court, at the Southern Command Station in August of 2012. The video IA court allowed for post-adjudicated arrestees to appear before a City Phoenix judge via video link, potentially avoiding the needing to be booked or the cost of the booking of a subject. From the start of that program, which was August of 2012 through the end of 2015, the video IA court conducted approximately 1,500 video hearings. Of those, 193 hearings resulted in the arrestee being remanded to jail, and 1,330 hearings resulted in the arrestee being released from the central booking facility. And again, thus avoiding some of the booking costs of those. When it comes to the staffing of the central booking detail, the staffing is comprised both of sworn and civilian staff. The support side, which is our record and identification side, consists of approximately 52 positions. That includes supervisors, police record clerks, fingerprint technicians, and support staff. The other side is the uniform side and is responsible for prisoner handling and consists of approximately 43 positions comprised both of sworn and civilian detention officers. We approximately have about 15 detention officers currently. Current central booking staffing levels are able to provide coverage 24 hours a day, Monday through Saturday. We don't have enough staffing to cover Sunday opening, so we have a different method that we handle it. The department's transition to the new record management system in October resulted in some changes to the booking process at the central booking facility. One of the most notable of these changes is the integral role that the central booking detail civilian staff having quality assurance, which requires that they review each and every booking, thus eliminating any kind of mistakes. Additionally, officers no longer have direct access to the MCSO booking system, and that's the connectivity, the link. So all their bookings go to the central booking detail. They review it, again, our quality control placement, and once it's all approved, they ship it to MCSO. The change really reduced the likelihood of errors in the final booking, but with that extra step and accountability, it's created a little bit of a longer process. Some of the enhancements that we can do, the central booking program has been successful overall since the start and has decreased the amount of time officers spend booking a prisoner, mainly in the wait time when it comes to MCSO jail. But there are greater enhancements that could create greater efficiencies. Some suggestions could be adding a second facility, which would be a North Zone central booking location, which would alleviate the congestion at the current facility, which again can only hold 12 prisoners at a time. Also, a North Zone central booking location would save on the long commutes from the officers in the north side precinct that may have to travel all the way to Central and Elwood in order to go to the central booking location. A second option is enlarging the current facility so we can actually hold more prisoners, and that would allow us to release the officers once we were able to take them in. And also increasing the staff members so we could process them in a more timely manner. That's an overall update of the department's central booking detail from its inception, if anybody has any questions.
Councilmember Williams?
Thank you, Chief. We're talking about misdemeanors, correct?
We're talking misdemeanors and felonies. Anybody booked into jail goes through our central booking detail.
Okay. And you put 164,000 prisoners through, which is, I guess where I'm headed with this is when we designed this in the beginning, and I expected the interaction between the booking place and the court to be much greater than it is. I really thought we were going to do IA court, boom, 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 with people that come in and out of there. So to see that less than 10% of the people that were booked in there actually appeared at IA court is a big disappointment to me. I'm hoping, I don't know if it was the lack of judges, the cameras, I don't know what it was, but I'm hoping in the future we can beef that up. I fully understand. I'm disappointed that our new management system, record management system, sounds like it doesn't interface directly with MCSO.
It does, but it goes through our R&I staff in central booking, and they're the ones that review it and then have the authority to interface or send it over to MCSO jail.
Is that a temporary situation because we're still training officers how to use it accurately?
No, it was designed that way, and before the officers on the street would send it and it'd go over there, but then errors would be made. This was more of a quality control measure that was put in place, so it was designed so that way it's sent to our record and identification people who are experts in the booking field and the booking paperwork, who it's kind of our quality control assurance piece to review it, make sure it's accurate, make sure all the information is gathered that needs to be gathered, fingerprints, buccal swabs, whatever the case may be, and then that is shipped over to MCSO jail.
And does the officer have to stay in while they're doing that process, or
There's
how do they gather if it's missing?
Right. There is a certain point that the officers have to stay till. So the officers make the arrest, they go into the booking module in the new record management system, fill out the booking paperwork. That gets transmitted to our central booking detail, mainly our record and identification clerks, our police records clerks, who review the charges and review the forms. So if there's any information missing, date of births, names, the charges are listed incorrectly, the officer has to make those changes.
Okay.
So it gets sent back to the officer, and then that's where it goes back and forth via electronically. So then,
Court?
so then once that happens and all the corrections are made, I should back up. The officers transport the prisoner to the jail. And if they haven't finished any corrections, they'll have to do it at that time. Once all the corrections, the booking's been reviewed, the property's been reviewed, et cetera, the officer is released and he can leave. Now our central booking people still make sure they fingerprint, take photographs, double check any warrant checks and check criminal history, and then they do all the background on that end before they get sent over to MCSO jail.
Okay.
So so it's kind of both the officer and our records clerks from central booking.
How many people do you have working that process? I mean, how long does it take is bottom line, I guess I'm asking.
Well, and it varies. It depends how busy we are at the facility. Again, we can hold up to 12. We currently, usually on a given day, the shift, we'll have 8 to 10 officers working the sworn side that handle the prisoners and transport and do that. And then we have about 8 on the non-sworn side that's doing our police records checks, checking the information, et cetera. So we need both in order to handle that. And that alleviates the officer from having to do that portion of it.
About how long does it take to go through that process? How long is an officer actually there?
Well, it depends. Yeah, I hate to sound like an attorney, but it depends. It depends.
Oops.
How long it takes them. It depends how familiar they are with the system when they're entering it. Depends how many charges and how involved the investigation is will determine how long it'll take them to even fill out a booking paperwork. When they get at the booking process or the central booking detail, if we're full, they have to wait in line before they get in there. If they're not full, and if in the perfect world, they could probably be in there, everybody can check everything, and it can be 20 minutes to an hour before they're released, and then the back end of the fingerprints, the photographs, et cetera, would happen afterwards, and then they'd be released. So it could be, it's hard to say. So the actual process from them walking into the central booking facility to them exiting could be anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on, how full, how many mistakes, circumstances.
I have another question on, and I'm not sure which one of you. They appear before the IA court, and can they be sentenced to home arrest from there,
Well,
waiting?
the video IA court, and I'll let the judge speak on this, but the video IA court has parameters on what criteria is meant to be seen in front of the video IA judge, and it's all post-adjudicated cases.
Oh, okay.
So that's why it's going to be significantly less than what we're going to be booking in, because we're going to book in, anything that just occurred, whether misdemeanor or felony, and these are post-adjudicated cases that meet that criteria. Judge?
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Williams, you asked some very good questions. When this program was initially set up about 4 years ago, and I remember I was just coming to the court on the tail end of it, it was because we'd identified a very specific population of individuals coming through basically the jail process that we thought with some minor changes we could divert so that we wouldn't have to pull the trigger on the booking fees over at Maricopa County. And not just the booking fees, but all of the officer time involved in taking them over there. And what we did was we looked at it, we said, we know there's a certain number of people who come through. They are post-adjudicated, which means they've been found guilty or at some point they had orders from the court to do certain things, either to pay fines, to pay restitution, to go to alcohol abuse classes or DV classes. They stopped being compliant at some point. We issued a warrant for their arrest when they failed to appear in court. We looked at that group of individuals because many of those individuals are at a point where currently, if they are actually booked into jail overnight at our jail court docket the next morning, what's going to happen is that the judge is going to decide that they should be released OR. So what we did when we set up the video link between central booking and 205 was we said, if we take this population of people and we can see them by video immediately, the judge can go ahead and do what we would do next morning anyway, which is we will give them a new court date, we will quash the warrant, they will be released, and then they'll come back in later and take care of it. And we never have to take them over to the jail and go through that process. I think we knew at the outset that was going to be a limited population of people. I think we at the time were assessing probably 3 to 5 a day over the course of what we went through. And I think for the first couple of years, that's very much what our experience was. So I think for what it was designed for at the time, in terms of that particular population, it's worked extraordinarily well. It's a lot of people who've been diverted without having to actually be booked. I know that there have been resource issues in the last many months with the police department, and that's part of the reason those numbers are down. One of the things that we talked about at the beginning was looking at this as the basis for something that could be expanded if it was successful. Part of it is the resource issue, but I'd be very happy to work with PD on that, because I think we're actually at a critical time when we could expand that for all the reasons that we thought it was a good idea in the first place, but also meet some additional needs. One of those being some big changes that I think are going to be made nationwide in the next couple of years in terms of pretrial detention. The numbers of people who are in trial or in pretrial detention, particularly on things like misdemeanors, awaiting trial, whether or not they should appropriately be there. And so I think it's a very good time for us to be taking a look at, with this in place, what can we do in partnership with PD to make sure that we're maximizing, really diverting people so that they don't have to go through that process over there at the jail, and that we don't incur those costs.
If you were to do that, could you somehow work out that they would be on home arrest until such time they had to go to trial or something like that? Or you were talking about doing a trial right there?
We wouldn't do a trial right there. That would entail expanding it to pre-adjudicated cases,
Yeah.
and really having what we now have at the jail, which is an initial appearance court
Right.
coupled with an arraignment. Because there we can actually do things like take pleas and have a disposition on the case. And there's no reason that we could not eventually look down the road at using the central booking facility if there are aspects of it that could either be built out, purpose-built for that, or other resources that we have, that we could have a presence and replicate down at central booking on some level what we currently do at the jail. Because if we could do that, then we'd have the option of diverting many, many more.
Right. Yeah. I was a naysayer in the beginning. You have convinced me. I think that this is where we should go in the future. I think we need to expand it. Everybody wants more officers in their neighborhood, and the more we can get those officers in and back in their neighborhood, the better off this whole community is. And I think what I would really like to see is the department work towards the north facility. They spend a lot of travel time going down there, where it could really be reduced. If you needed to take them then to jail, you bunch them up and get the old wagon back out and take them down in that. But I think this is something that is working well. needs to be expanded, and I would really like to see in the next year or two that a lot of emphasis is put on this and to hire the necessary staff, civilian and sworn. I think this is the way of the future, and it solves so many problems. So I congratulate you on what you've accomplished, where you've gone, and I really look forward to hearing more in the future on how you can expand this and work together and really make it not only viable, but probably set the standard.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And if I can just add, we do have a wagon program that we have in place for patrol that is trying to pick up prisoners on the north side to try to help alleviate some of that transport time. But again, you know, they still have to take officers to do that and transport them down. But some of them still have to make that transport. But we are trying to put at least something in place to minimize the travel.
Think big.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Gallego?
Thank you. I could not agree more with Councilwoman Williams that reducing jail costs gives us more money for police officers. Part of the reason I asked the next item be put on the agenda was to look at things like the judge just suggested with pretrial costs. If we can really bring those down and manage this budget more responsibly, it frees up money for the things the citizens want us to do. As we've seen, jail costs go up, I think 17% just this year alone. That's a really concerning trend, and we need to be responsive to that, minimize those costs, and spend the money where the citizens want us to spend the money. So I would love it if we could speed up some of the suggestions that you just made and see if we can't manage that budget more responsibly. It really sounds like a win for the justice system and for the taxpayers. I also think it's important that we talk about who the population is. I had the police department shared some information with me about who is in the jail system. It was disproportionately drug crimes. So maybe if you guys could speak a little bit more to that, like who are the population that is in central booking?
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Gallego, I don't know that I could tell you across the board who the population is that's in central booking in terms of any sort of discrete, meaningful way. What I can tell you is that one of the things that has concerned me in the last couple of years, particularly as I've looked around the country at what is concerning many people, is whether or not, regardless of other demographics, we've got people in custody pretrial who really are there only because they can't afford to pay a very small bond, regardless of what brought them there. Because at the end of the day, you know, we could probably talk around some of the margins of it, but it looks and feels an awful lot like people sitting in custody simply because they don't have funds, which is not something that I think any of us want to see happen and want to be proud of. And it has the direct implications that you were talking about, I think, you know, economically and efficiency-wise. So I think we could legitimately say, based on what we've seen over the years, that it disproportionately falls upon people with limited financial means. Anything further than that, I don't know that I could tell you at this point.
Wonderful. I agree. We've seen several times as we looked at our justice system, that the people who are in jails are, especially on the pretrial basis, are there because they cannot afford simple fines that for many people, and we've had great success. I think we're going to hear about it later in the meeting with our municipal compliance assistance program, where we've been able to get people better justice outcomes and additional money into the city by looking at fines and how we can either build upon, people who are in the system who already have some fines, we can keep growing them or we can help them manage them. This is, I think, building on that success would be looking at the pretrial costs and seeing how we can make that make sense for the taxpayers and public safety.
Councilmember Williams has a response.
I worked in the jails for over 11 years, and I will tell you, 8 years ago, that 78% of the people being booked in that jail had a substance problem. They either had full of drugs or alcohol, and that was one of the reasons they were being booked in. And 67% of them were repeat offenders. And that was taken into consideration. I don't know if that holds true today, but I'll bet it's not too far off. That's a problem for police, it's a problem for the jails, and it's one of the reasons they can't be immediately released is the facts are still intoxicated, one way or the other. And jail serves as a place to sober up. Whether that meets with the court release or not is not always the case, but that's often the reason so many people are booked into jail.
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Williams, that's absolutely true. And part of what happens with people who have a substance abuse problem is they end up creating further problems for themselves because they're also, as a population, much more likely to fail to appear. So part of what is happening in these situations where people are in custody pre-trial on low bonds is a function of the fact that those bonds are set because the person has failed to come to court 3 or 4 times. And so the court is left in some instances with very few tools to encourage the person to come back and make sure that they're there. They generally are not going to be a recidivism problem out in the community, and they're not a flight risk. They're not running away to New York. They're just not coming back downtown to court. And so that's very often why those bonds are put in place. And that is, in my experience, very often a result of substance abuse problems. And let's be honest, there is probably a disproportionate share of other behavioral health problems and mental health issues going on with that population.
Families are tired of putting the money up and losing it.
Yeah.
They no longer support them.
Councilmember Pastor.
So for me, central booking is critical. And what I mean by that is it gets our officers back into our neighborhoods and back in the streets. And due to budget reasons, we did eliminate civilian positions. And I believe it was my first year that we looked at it, or it was last year that we looked at it. And positions were removed. And so I am now hearing how critical those positions are, or understanding how critical they are, because police officers are spending, could possibly be 20 minutes, we hope 20 minutes, but 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on what is happening in the central booking at the time. I also have heard some advocacy for Sunday, and it being open on Sunday, because it helps. Because then it's longer time off the streets. And so I'm an advocate of this. It's just now we need to find the funding to increase it and make it move happen faster. So I appreciate everything that you guys do. I appreciate the fact that this innovative, I don't know if it was innovative, but it was implemented in 2010, and it has shown its results. And so hoping that we do increase our video IA, but now understanding what the population that you work with in this court, that would make sense why the numbers, it's lower than what we anticipated. So thank you.
Any other comments from my colleagues? Well, first of all, I just want to thank you all for thinking outside the box and coming up with this pilot program. Now it looks like it's a program that we should spread out throughout the whole city. I mean, our courts continue to work in creating innovative ways, like our veterans court that we have, our homeless court, and all the stuff that we're doing with the domestic violence victims, and also now with our new payment program, trying to get individuals their driver's license back so they can be out on the streets, driving and working at the same time, and picking up their children and going to the grocery store and stuff like that they need to do with the driver's license. So just thank you so much for coming up with these type of programs. I think you heard loud and clear that we need something out there in the North Phoenix. And if there's some way, somehow we can actually figure out a way to budget that would be great. The other thing is just the whole safety of our officers. So when a person is booked, we do a full background check on that person before putting them in front of a camera, and there's safety precautions, and especially for those employees of ours that aren't sworn officers and for the sworn officers, right?
Mr. Chair, council members, that's correct. On everybody that's arrested, there's a criminal history check on each individual. It's part of the process, fingerprints, photographs, and a criminal history check to make sure who we're dealing with, if they have any outstanding warrants, et cetera. So we have that prior to them being booked.
Alrighty, thank you. Our next item is number 8, jail alternatives. This was brought to us by Councilmember Gallegos. I'm trying to think of innovative ways of maybe saving some of our costs and having individuals in the county jail.
Chairman Nowakowski, Vice Mayor, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity and good morning. I've got with me Management Assistant 2, Aaron Mertz from the Budget and Research Department. He did a lot of the legwork on this, so I'm going to let him present a little bit of this to you. And we also got Chief Harvey with us since Chief Yonner is out, as we all know. What I'm going to talk to you about today, it's actually a really good presentation to follow what we just discussed. A lot of the alternatives that we're going to talk about today, you've actually just discussed in the previous presentation in terms of how we can save jail costs. But before we get started, what I wanted to do is give you a history of where we are with our jail costs. So as you know, by way of background, since 1974, the City of Phoenix has essentially been contracting with MCSO to provide jail and detention services for us. As part of that arrangement, the city currently pays the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office a booking and a housing fee. The booking fee is for the first day, and then the housing fee is the daily rate that you pay for each individual incarcerated beyond that first day. Since 2012, 2013, the booking charge has increased about 20%, and I think that was the impetus, or some of the impetus, as to why we're doing this research and why Vice Mayor asked us to look into this. The daily housing rate has also increased 5% since 2012, 2013. Next year's booking rate, based on what the county has proposed and has given to us as a final rate for next year, is $306.84 per person. The daily housing rate for next year is $90.37. What we've done here is make an attempt to compare MCSO's rates to the other county rates. It's really almost impossible to do, and there are a variety of reasons as to why. Number one, the scale. The size of Maricopa County prison and detention centers are considerably larger than any other county in the state. The other piece is some of these other entities are subsidized by the federal government because they provide services to the federal government, and they're using what's known as a federal housing rate. That federal housing rate is actually on the verge of being updated. It hasn't been updated in over 5 years. Right now it's about $65, and Mr. Mertz will talk to you a little bit more about that as we move forward. But that $65 rate is essentially a rate that really doesn't truly exist anymore. But when you compare Maricopa County to Pima, which is our next closest counterpart, you can see the rates are actually fairly consistent. They're fairly close to one another. So again, I think it really begs and it points out that it's really scale and size that drive some of these costs. What this chart does is, again, we're trying to show you since 2001, 2002, what the city has paid Maricopa County, and you can see on this, we've paid Maricopa County almost over $155 million since 2001, 2002 for jail and detention services. At the same time, you're very well aware that we also have on our water bill, our municipal services bill, a $1 surcharge that goes to all of our customers. That generates about $7 million a year, and it offsets partially our jail costs. That used to be $2. It was reduced back in 2008, 2009 to $1. And you can see there's a pretty big disparity between the revenue that we take in from that jail excise tax versus what we're paying Maricopa County. Right now, going back to 0102, you can see essentially $31 million in less revenue compared to the actual costs that we bear have been collected. So again, you've heard just recently from Chief Renteria as well as Judge Taylor talking about some of the different strategies that we employ to drive down our jail costs. And I'll just kind of walk through a couple of these. We use several different things. One is the home detention and the alcohol monitoring program. We also have video arraignment court, which we've just discussed and talked about even potentially expanding. And that's one of the recommendations that we'll be talking to you about in our presentation as well. The other piece is the central booking facility. Again, that also helps us because it eliminates the number of folks that we ultimately have to book into the county system if it's run operationally and effectively. The cost avoidance strategies listed above in this chart, you can see we basically last fiscal year, we saved over $2.5 million by deploying these strategies. So again, they do work. And again, I think there's credence for expanding some of them, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But now what we're going to talk about is the impetus behind this research was what Tucson's doing with Santa Cruz. So what I'm going to have Aaron Mertz walk you through is what he found in that discussion with Santa Cruz and Tucson. And Tucson almost has they hit a sweet spot. And there's a reason why their program is going to save them a little bit of money, not a lot of money, but there's a reason why it works for them and it really doesn't lend itself to what we're doing. And we'll kind of walk you through some of that.
Good morning, Chairman, Council members. I'll go ahead and walk you through a little bit about the Tucson pilot program here. Kind of the basics of it are City of Tucson signed a intergovernmental agreement with Santa Cruz County for detention services for some Tucson inmates. We'll touch on that in a moment. The details are that Tucson will pay Santa Cruz County no booking fee and just a daily rate, as Jeff mentioned, of that federal rate, $65. Now this only applies to prisoners with sentences greater than 10 days, so that kind of narrows the pool pretty significantly when you think about the types of crimes that are happening at the municipal level, and misdemeanors and whatnot. And then the next piece here is really kind of the crux of the deal that Tucson has. Santa Cruz County manages and pays for all of the transportation costs to and from the jail in Douglas, which is about an hour away from Tucson. Consequently there, Tucson's only cost is for the staff time, and then they also provide some return bus vouchers for inmates once they're released down in Douglas. So as you can see, the cost of Tucson, very, very minimal because they don't have to manage the transportation. And all of that is borne by Santa Cruz County. So because of that, their estimated annual savings, at least currently, are about $268,000. Obviously, they're still in the middle of this pilot program. It just started up in January, so they're kind of waiting to get some results back and see how things play out. I believe it's a one-year agreement is what they signed initially. So we'll see if they're able to achieve those savings. But really, fundamentally, those savings are able to be obtained because Santa Cruz County is picking up the cost of the transportation. So we'll talk a little bit now about if the city of Phoenix tried to do a similar operation, but we were the ones who had to take on that transportation cost, what it would look like. Obviously, there are a variety of kind of cost pieces that you have to take into account. There's staffing. We modeled one FTE added to manage the transportation. That could be, some additional officers having overtime to manage it. It could be just using a new employee, or an additional employee, I should say. Obviously, you have to add a vehicle to manage the transport, O&M, and then insurance costs is an interesting piece here. We talked to our risk management section, and once you start to take on additional prisoner transport and really anything surrounding jail facilities, the insurance industry really raises an eyebrow. So there's a pretty significant chance that our premiums would reflect an increase if we were to take on this type of program.
And one thing I would add there, when you look at the rates that the sheriff currently charges us, one of the biggest drivers are the insurance and the indemnification and the liability issues that they take on every year, as well as their medical costs. So again, it's consistent with what the sheriff passes on basically to us as a customer of his every year.
Right. So overall, you take into account all of those costs. Year one costs, you're looking at $395,000 to $445,000. Year two costs obviously would be going down a little bit because you wouldn't have that upfront cost of a vehicle and whatnot. But that's kind of the number that we would be looking at to even break even if we were to implement this type of program. As you can kind of remember back from the Tucson program, we would still continue to pay booking and housing to MCSO until sentencing. This is just for their program, just for prisoners post-sentencing, in their case, 10 days or longer. So there is still going to be a cost that we're paying to Maricopa County. This is really just kind of trying to find some savings on the margins if we could. And then one final consideration too is inmate capacity. Obviously, we are a very large population here, and so if we were to try and find another avenue for sending prisoners, it would have to involve a jail that could accommodate that. And that's, as you see, I think there was a graph or a chart earlier in the presentation. Not all of the county jails that are out there can necessarily accommodate us. So one more kind of piece of information to take into account as we look at this going forward. I think Jeff will handle some of the kind of conclusions we can draw from this.
So again, to Aaron's last point, there is not one jail that could handle all of Phoenix's inmates if we were to try and do this to defray some of our costs. We would have to spread them amongst several, so we'd have to enter into multiple IGAs more than likely to make this really work. And again, you're talking transportation then into multiple areas, so we may have to add more transportation costs than what we've actually laid out here, if that's the route we went. So again, in conclusion, we're saying to basically break even with the numbers that Aaron just showed you, we would need to transfer basically 40% of our inmates, or our housing days, to other localities. And based on what we've seen, that's just really not even possible. There are very few prisons or jails in the county, in the state, that could actually accommodate that level of inmate. So again, from that standpoint, it doesn't appear that it would even work for us. The other piece, again, that just kind of reiterates that. The other piece is the potential impact to our daily housing rate. I've been dealing with the MCSO Sheriff's Office for a long time, and I've audited the rate several times, and I've found discrepancies and errors in it in the past. The issue you have to understand about the way their rate and the way their cost model works, their cost to provide services in the interim, if we were to take some of our inmates out, take some of that population out and send them elsewhere, their cost remains. And so what that means is they're going to spread that cost now over fewer inmates. So the folks that we leave behind, we're going to end up paying more for those. So whatever savings we save by sending someone elsewhere, more than likely it's going to be offset by increased charges from the county, just because that's the way their cost model is structured. In order to really get savings from the county, you have to drastically change their staffing model. You have to have them either close prisons, lay off detention officers, or something to that extent, or drive down their other piece, which is significant, is their medical cost. That's the only real way to save cost on MCSO at this point in time. So again, due to the logistical concerns, the staffing, we don't recommend right now transporting prisoners outside of Maricopa County based on the research that we did, based on the discussions that we've had with other entities. So what we recommend, again, and this is consistent with what you just heard in the previous presentation, that we explore other opportunities and other alternatives. Primarily, the expanded use of video arraignment and home detention. We think that's a really strong area that we could consider and pursue. The costs are minimal because most of those costs are passed on to the participants. The other piece is we think there could be a review of bookable offenses. Right now, again, and I think this is consistent with what the discussion you also had, when you look at the number of people that are being arrested and what they're being arrested for, as well as their background, sometimes we arrest people and we're putting them in jail and they don't necessarily need to be put in jail. They could be cited and released. So I think in concert with police and the court and the prosecutor, we could look at those and try and figure out, are there some areas where we could actually shave down or start reducing the number of people that we're actually sending to jail. The other piece is the opening or the exploration of opening a night court in central booking. That's something that we also think is feasible. Again, it would entail building out central booking a little bit more, and it could also lend itself, if in fact you do expand central booking to the north, you could also have one up there as well. Again, it takes additional money. We'd have to budget for that and plan for that, but we think these are the areas in which the city really finds its sweet spot in terms of reducing our jail costs, not necessarily transporting outside of MCSO. So with that, we'd open it up to any questions you may have.
I have a quick question. Have you researched how much potentially that could cost to expand that or to do the night court, either one?
We have
and what the
not.
savings would be?
We
Is
have
that
not.
something you could do over the summer for us?
We could do that.
Because I think it's obvious, it's worth pursuing. I understand too, if we're back in that catch-22, fewer inmates going in, the costs go up. I do want to say, after being there, the health costs, that's not the sheriff's office. They contract for
Right.
all the
They
health
do.
services, and it's outside their purview on how those costs continue to rise too. So this is the third study I've gone through on this for the city of Phoenix in the last 15, 20 years. Each time it's turned out the same way. We just are a very large city. Unfortunately, crime happens. Jails are a necessity. I agree there are a lot of people that are in jail, put in jail. That's not their option, but the state is very poor about mental health issues, and I think that puts a real burden on our officers and our pocketbook because so many of those people stop their meds, change their meds or whatever, and end up being arrested, and they're booked into jail for their own safety as well as the communities. And that's a shame, and I think we ought to pursue that in the future too, is really encouraging the state and the county to recognize the impact that they're having on our society and their responsibilities. I think it is their responsibility to address this and pony up and provide alternate services because families just simply can't afford to anymore. But thank you for this study.
Councilmember Gagos?
Thank you to the chairman for putting this item on the agenda. I think it's enormously important that we look at this. When we look at the numbers, 155 million on MCSO jail bills. I mean, this is real money to the city of Phoenix. On my first day of business school strategy class, they said, if you have a vendor and they have a monopoly, they're the only one you can work with, you should expect prices to go up. If a customer has no choice, you should expect in any business situation prices to go up. And frankly, these prices are going up faster than other expenses to the city of Phoenix. What do you have in here? 7% last year on booking fees, 7% the year before that, 6% for the year before that. That's significant increases, and it's faster than many of our other expenses. So it's not surprising. So when we get these expenses, do we talk with other cities and try to manage it together? What happens when we get this higher booking fee?
The county, what they do, the process in which they go through, they have a consultant that updates their rate model every year. In the past, the city auditor's department, as well as budget and research, have been responsible for the city's perspective, the city of Phoenix, reviewing that rate model and making sure that the rate model is consistent, that there's nothing inappropriate going on. And we have found discrepancies in the past, we have. But what they do is they send out a preliminary rate notice as early as October, usually it's in November timeframe. They send out a prelim rate notice to all of the entities that use their services. That's followed up in February with a final notice of what the rate's going to be. It used to be as late as March and April. We've actually, in concert with all the cities, got them to kind of step back because of our budget process. That's way too late for us to get that built in. So they actually send these messages out, these notices out. Sometimes they have a committee in which we actually sit down together and we talk about the rising cost and if are there any opportunities to kind of reduce some of those things. So there usually is a forum in which you can kind of question some things. The door is always open also for us and our city auditor department as well as our police department. They review the monthly jail bills to make sure that we're only paying for our prisoners. So I think that's also important because in the past there have been some costs passed on to us that weren't our costs and that shouldn't have been borne by us. So I think the police department does a really good job about doing that now. What we do in budget and research is we kind of model what our jail costs are going to be based off of all of the bookings, all of the the housing days and all of those things, and we project those forward. So again, to your point, there is a forum, there is a process in which all of the cities, if you don't necessarily agree with their methodology, you can question it, you can challenge it, but at the end of the day, their costs are really driven by their customers. At the end of the day, the more people we arrest, the more people we send to them, it necessitates where they have to build and add staff. And that's one of the conversations we had with them years ago when I was involved in some of this. A lot of what Maricopa County will tell you, a lot of their prison system is based on Phoenix. It's based on us. It's based on the need to serve us. And that we are so large, that's why they've built what they've built. So again, to the extent that we can drive down how many people we're sending to them, I think that's where our opportunity is, Councilwoman.
Do we have a sense as to what % of the folks in the Maricopa County system are from Phoenix?
I do not.
I think that would just be good to sense. How important of a customer are we? That would be good to know.
You know that? That's off the
It
top
used to
of
be between 75 and 80%.
Wow, 75 and 80%. So we are the significant driver.
I would imagine we are, yes.
So on day 2 of business school, they tell you, though, if you have other customers and you work together, you might be able to negotiate a better deal. And it seems to, do we negotiate in their forum, or do we come together first and say?
Usually it depends. It really depends on the increase. And the other thing that some of the other cities have done, they've done some of the same things that we're doing. Central booking, video arraignment, and all of those things. So I think everyone's thinking along the same lines in terms of how can we reduce those costs. Typically, the forum, first we start firing off a bunch of emails to one another because we all get these notices and we all talk to each other, the other cities that is. And then sometimes what we'll do is through Intergov, so we'll have Tom Remus actually spearhead some of those discussions amongst some of the other entities or bring us all together. Then we've had in the past some discussions with the county holistically with everyone there. But we have we've done it both ways. We've done it all in front of the county. We've done it consistently just amongst us, all the customers, and then went to the county and aired our concerns as well. So it really depends year over year.
Would it be safe to guess Mesa is the second largest?
Mesa would probably be the second largest, I would assume.
And they've been doing some pretty innovative things
Yeah.
generally on managing public safety costs. So could we, in the next month, touch base with them and talk about managing?
Sure.
And maybe in partnership?
Any other comments? Councilmember Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think the timing is good, not only for the city of Phoenix, but for the others, because I know that the Durango jail is just about obsolete. And the cost of a new jail, we're talking, what, up to $100 million. And I think it's important that we all work together in this county, the cities and the county. We didn't have to build a new jail and we could eliminate one. That's going to help bring the cost down for all of us. But it has to be a united effort. And bottom line is taxpayers pay for it all. So anything we could do to still protect our community but save the dollars, I think would be graciously appreciated. And the timing is perfect to begin those negotiations.
Any other comments? Well, I just want to thank you, and thank you for looking into expanding our video arrangements and home detentions. That might be an alternative for us, and also exploring opening up another facility in the North Phoenix and also having night court. So all those are little by little we're chipping away. But right now there's not an alternative. So maybe in the private sector in the future there might be something out there. So if anybody's listening to us, we need another alternative for the city of Phoenix. So right now we're kind of stuck. Thank you.
You're not putting them in my backyard.
Alrighty, we have item number 9. That's licensing of scrap metal. One of the reasons that we brought this is that we started seeing a lot of the, we buy aluminum cans and then we have scrap metal being sold at those locations also. So we were just figuring out ways to enforce that, and that's what this update's all about.
All right. Good morning. On January 13th, we appeared and presented a recommendation, and the recommendation would be that reinstatement of the city's licensing program for scrap metal dealers, and that we conform city code to state law, which had just been passed the preceding year. There was a unanimous approval by council here, or the subcommittee, and it directed us to do a proposed ordinance, to draft a proposed ordinance, and to notify the stakeholders, which we did. In fact, we sent out notifications on 2 separate occasions to 60 scrap metal dealers within like weeks of our job. I think the most important thing is that we had to draft new language, and with the help of legal, licensing, and government relationships, we were able to do that. There's not a whole lot of changes that would really occur, except for one regarding an exclusion for aluminum can handlers who only deal with that. We're recommending that we continue to not make them register as a scrap metal licensee, which is something we've always done in the city of Phoenix. A current state law says it does not include the same exemption, but ARS prohibits the city from regulation of sale, use, or disposition of auxiliary containers, which includes aluminum cans. And therefore, we do not recommend changing the city definition of scrap metal dealers at this time. The other thing is that there was a threshold of reporting. The new state law requires that all scrap metal transactions be reported. There is no threshold, and we want to change that language. Transaction limitations. The new state law talked about payment of check or money order by mail to the seller's physical address for non-ferrous items greater than $300. There is an exemption in which if the account holder that we have already been doing business with and somebody we meet frequently and we can identify this person, we can go ahead and pay them on the spot. The law is primarily meant to prevent people who are unknown to us, who are bringing in product that we can't decide or determine whether or not this product is stolen. So it's it's a good thing. Police Department recommends the city code of scrap metal transactions limitations conform to state laws. Prohibited transaction, there was a new law passed which prohibits municipal storm grates from being brought into scrap metal dealers, and that's smart. So anyway, our recommendation today is that the City Council, that the Public Safety and Veterans Subcommittee recommends City Council approval of the proposed reinstatement of scrap metal dealer licensing and proposed changes to the Phoenix City Code related to scrap metal.
Any comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commander, do we still have the ability, I think we had the software, we purchased it a few years ago, that we can log in and interface with other cities on stolen scrap metal?
Yes, ma'am.
We do? And
Yes.
is that working well?
It is working well. Unfortunately, the scrap metal businesses are just going away. The market has really been plummeting, and the cost for scrap metal has gone down
Oh, tremendously.
immensely. And probably 35% of scrap metal dealers in Phoenix have ceased to exist.
Well, I heard a lot of them moved outside our city limits
Mm-hmm.
because they just didn't like what you did.
Well.
You were picky, you kept arresting them.
Well, that's a good thing. But yes, we do have that hardware. In fact, we can reach out across the entire southwest of the United States and confirm and information from counties and states all around. So it's important. It's a very good tool.
I think it's very important we update this and continue to monitor, because times change quickly and metal can become very valuable again.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other comments?
This is very important to many of the churches, businesses, and residents in our community, so I'm glad that we are making this a priority and continue to. The economic impact has been so significant, and some of the stories of people impacted by metal theft, including some very, very vulnerable schools, churches, charities. So it's wonderful that we're making this a priority.
And Commander, as the building permits go up, also the crime goes up, stealing copper and
Oh,
air
absolutely.
conditioning units and stuff like that. So that's one of the things that we're starting to see an increase, and hopefully with these inspections, we can actually cut down on that, and those individuals stealing know that they're not going to be able to sell it.
Yes, sir. Interestingly is that we have met with the scrap metal dealers for about 3 years now, monthly. And many of them want to conform to state law and city code to prevent those people who behave criminally in the business and to push them out. And this law enables us to do that.
And Commander, one of the things that we're hearing is where people are buying aluminum cans, they're also buying scrap metal.
Yes.
Is there a way for us to enforce that also? I know we can't enforce the aluminum cans aspect of it, but if they are taking scrap metal, can we enforce that part?
Oh, absolutely, because by state law, they still have to register online through DPS as a scrap metal vendor. So we have that right and are empowered by the state to go ahead and conduct our inspections. And in doing so, we will find the contraband and the other stuff that will, trafficking and stolen property and stuff like that. So, yes.
Know that this is for information discussion only. There's not a motion on this.
I have action on my,
Is there action?
says this item is for discussion and action.
Then move approval.
All right.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It passes. Thank you. Alrighty, next we have our public safety budget update. It's all yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. Jill Sly with the Police Department, and I'm here to present our budget for actuals through the end of February. As you can see, right now we're at 66% of our budget, which we're basically on budget with all of our funds, so we're doing pretty good there. For the month of February, our actuals are higher than last year due to payment to Taser for replacement tasers, the bill for the Humane Society that you all approved recently, and some vehicle replacements that we paid out in February. And then our top 10 expenditures continue to be personal service items, with the exception of our jail services, equipment management charges, and sick leave payout. And finally, our revenues. We have court awards. The reason for the discrepancy there from last year is because we used some of that money to pay for the implementation of RMS. And for the IGAs and task force, last year we had to pay, we received additional funds for our participation in the Southwest Border Alliance. And that's it. If you have any questions.
Any questions? Thank you. Next, we have the court.
Good morning, Mr. Councilman, members of the subcommittee. I'm Patricia Lucero, here to present on behalf of the municipal court, and I also have Judge Taylor with me, who will be doing a presentation on the Compliance Assistance Program. Today, our municipal court budget at the end of March is about $19 million, which is at 75% of the budget used. We are about, yes, next slide, sorry. Our monthly expenditures, the total court expenditures are similar to the same time last year, with about a 2.53 difference. Our expenditures, our top 10 expenditures, again, similar to other months, is 10%. Is personnel cost. The top three, salaries, pension contribution, and the health insurance, with our salaries being at 37% of total expenditures. And our revenues collected is about 10% under where we were same time last year. And this does not include what we are tracking for the Compliance Assistance Program, which Judge Taylor will do a presentation on. So we are about 10% under where we were last year. And that's where we are for the municipal court, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on the courts? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, if I may, I had the opportunity to come and talk to you a couple of months ago about the Compliance Assistance Program, told you what it was that we hoped to accomplish, and that I was going to be excited to come back and tell you some of our results, and I'm excited to be here. I think I can tell you that from our perspective, the program so far, in a little over 2 months that it's been up and running, or 2.5 months, has been an enormous success. We track very closely the number of people who participate, the number of dollars that are presented. We track where they came from, how old the debt is, whether they had made payments in the past. Lots and lots of information, because we want to be very clear about how it's working and what effect it's actually having. I can tell you that through this morning, we've had a little over 3,900 people that have come through on the program. And I expect that either late tomorrow or sometime on Friday, we will actually hit 4,000. That is, in my mind, 4,000 success stories. That is 4,000 people who before the program were non-compliant, which meant that they were sitting on debts that they owed the court, some of them from quite a few years ago, and in a situation where MVD had been notified that they had failed to pay, their driver's license was suspended. They would also be subject to things like registration holds, tax intercept, those sorts of things. So that's 4,000 success stories. That's 4,000 people that at this point I'm confident have been at least released from any effect we were having at the court on their ability to get a license. And I believe that is an awful lot of people now who are doing exactly what Chairman Nowakowski was suggesting a moment ago. They're having the ability to work, they're having the ability to look for additional jobs, they're having the ability to legally, legitimately pick up children, etc. And I think to echo a point that Vice Mayor Gallego made earlier on, really from any perspective, that's 4,000 people who are able again to legitimately participate in the economy, and really be, productive members of doing that. Now, Although I think the other thing that we told you about from the beginning was that this was not about the money. The money has been a significant aspect of the program. Of those approximately 4,000 people who have participated, we have generated about $5 million in promises to pay over the next couple of years. So, Councilwoman Williams, we are going to start making that dent that you alluded to a couple of months ago when we spoke about the amount of outstanding financial obligations to the court. Those are the promises to pay. We are tracking very closely the compliance rates that we're getting with people. So far, we are finding astoundingly better compliance rates than we have had in the past. Now, part of that is because I have asked staff to approach it very differently. We are taking a more proactive, I would even say more hand-holding approach. In the past, we've sort of taken the approach, this is the debt somebody owes, they're adults, they don't pay it, here's what happens to you. Well, what we're doing now is taking a little more time and a little more resources to actually contact people and to actually say, you know, look, here's what happened. You remember you didn't have the license. It caused problems for you. You liked it when you came in 2 months ago and were able to make the down payment. You made your first payment. You missed your second. What's going on? And we're finding that that little bit of reaching out to people is paying huge dividends in terms of keeping them in the system, which again is really the goal at the end of the day, because if people stay compliant, then they don't suffer those consequences, and we're better off. And we're better off to the tune at this point of about $1.7 million actual money collected. So I talked a moment ago about $5 million in promises to pay over the next couple of years, reactivated payment plans. As of today, we're looking at about 1.7, as I said, $million actually collected between the down payments and the monthly payments as they've come in, which translates to between $800,000 and $900,000 in actual city revenue that we were not going to see prior to the program. Now, let me go back to just a little bit to what Patricia was saying. You know, you can see there, this is through the end of March, that we're looking about slightly under 10% under revenues year over year. Now, this actually does reflect the compliance assistance program numbers being in there. What you don't see is what it would have been without it. And that is that you would have seen us being closer to 15 to 16% under last year. Part of that being because we are continuing to see a significant reduction in the number of filings. That, you know, as we've talked about before with Chief Yonner being here, is a result of police officer staffing and levels and resources and availability. So it's something that we would continue to see. We are enormously excited about the program. We have gotten quite a bit of interest from around the state. We have had other jurisdictions that have come in and wanted to see what we're doing, are going back and trying to implement it. That's good for everybody, because if the entire state is following a similar model, then it means it's much easier for people who have tickets in multiple jurisdictions to actually take advantage of the program and get back and be able to get the license back and participate in the economy again. So we're very excited. It's a small piece of where I want to go with this culture change that we're bringing to the system, but it's been a successful one. So happy to be here and be able to tell you about it.
Thank you, Judge. Member Gagel?
We've made some name changes in terms of focusing on the fact that we're doing compliance assistance. Could you just update us on that and how that's going?
You know, we actually, Mr. Chair, Vice Mayor Gagel, we actually talked quite a bit about what kinds of things that we could do to actually sort of really make it resonate that what we were trying to do was create a cultural change. That was one of the ways that, as we struggled with the name for the program, we came up with compliance assistance. Because we wanted to really emphasize two things, as I think I talked to you about earlier. It really is about accountability and opportunity. You know, it is holding people accountable at the end of the day, which by and large people don't have a problem with. They just want there to be a reasonable way to do it. and have it be sustainable. And so we are there to make sure that we are doing everything we can to assist them in getting and staying compliant with the court's orders, whether they're financial or otherwise, rather than presenting stumbling blocks. We want to make sure that if you end up with this debt to society, that we're not doing things that make it harder for you to pay it. And I think that we tried to capture that in the name. One of the things that I think, Vice Mayor, you may be alluding to is we've also looked at sort of drilling that down and changing the name of some of our working titles for staff. So we have for very long referred to our group of staff in the financial division who help people with payment plans, who actually decide how much they can afford to pay, et cetera. We've called them financial enforcement officers, which is what we've been doing. But as we're trying to change more of this culture, we're going to be calling them compliance assistance officers. Really to bring in the idea that what we're doing there is helping people. And I will tell you that one of the things that's been very gratifying to me has been to see court staff really embrace these changes and really enjoy taking on this new role where they don't feel like they're the bad guy. But that they're actually there to assist people in working through this process. So we're trying to make sure that the language that we're using is appropriate to what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
Wonderful, thank you. People want to do the right thing, and so if we can help them get their license back, get on a payment plan, that's a win for the taxpayers and it's a win for the city of Phoenix. How exciting to have $1.7 million in, that helps. But more importantly, people can drive safely. People were driving without their driver's licenses anyway, sometimes getting yet another ticket or maybe more than one ticket and really getting in a spiral that was hard to get out of. And I'm glad that we can partner with people and help them to try to do the right thing, get right with the court system and move on, which is safety is our goal, not revenue. It's a bonus that the revenue is going in the right direction, but this is a program that will help people have a better relationship with the city of Phoenix and a better outcome for safety. So thank you for the good news.
Thank you, Judge. We have fire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Ken Lake. I'll be presenting for the fire department. One thing I want to bring your attention to, this is a January update. I actually have the February's here, but they're very similar. It's just that we moved another month forward, so I can either present one or the other, but or both. Oh, one that's in deck. Okay, perfect. Well, of this point in time of the year, we're 55% spent, but it's 58% of the year as far as the reporting. So as you can see, we're slightly below what our budget allocation was for this time of the year. And as far as monthly expenditures, they are pretty much in line with what we figured. We're about $2.1 million over where we were last year. And we'll kind of get to those as we get into the top 10, and they become more evident. Okay, so the top 10 expenditures are pretty much what they are with the colleagues, is salaries, pensions, insurance. As we go down the line, there's a couple of them that actually went down, which is actually in general, I'll show pension contributions general and holiday fire have went down just slightly, but for the most part, they're in line with what we saw last year. Revenues, again, our ambulance transports are up. They're about 25% more than they were last year. Same reasoning as we've been reporting. The change in the healthcare system, we're getting more folks we're transporting and the activity levels are up. So that constitutes about $4.5 million over what we received last year revenues. And that's all I have. Happy to have any questions.
Any questions or comments? Well, thank you very much for the report. Now we're on to future agenda items.
Mr. Chairman, there's a sheet coming around that lists some items, potential items for the May 11th meeting.
Is there any additional future agenda items that my colleagues would like to put on?
I would still love to learn more from other cities. I think Mesa probably is the right starting point in terms of managing public safety expenses and potentials to share resources, negotiate together, and generally partner to.
Would a report be sufficient, written report, or are you wanting a presentation?
I guess I'm hopeful that we can maybe partner in on things such as jail costs, work together. I think bargaining together is effective, but would certainly defer to the chairman on what he wants to see.
What we should do is have a report and let's see if there is any ways of
Okay.
doing that. If there is, then we should bring it into the full
plan.
Any other future agenda items, Ms. Williams?
I'm going to ask the question, have there been any significant changes in the laws that, at the legislature this year? Is this something we need to report on? Have they changed how we have to operate in any way? I don't know.
Well, there's a number of bills that are still bottled up that we're not sure are going to move. I think in terms of this particular committee, the most recent passage of the law that impacted our Redflex contract. So essentially all of the intersections where we have cameras, in addition to the placement of the vehicles in school zones, we're not enforcing any of that right now because of the requirement that Redflex or whoever your vendor is has to have a PI license, a private investigator license. So
Ready camera?
That's why we wanted to bring it up
That's-
to talk about it.
Yeah.
that's happened since you've been out. And the law department's advice, based on the wording of the law, I sent a letter to Redflex suspending that contract. So we're sort of in limbo until that gets resolved.
And that's the same for where you have the vehicles with the cameras at schools?
Yes, the law prohibits the processing of those photographs by an entity unless they have a private investigator license. So Redflex is in the process of pursuing that. I don't know how long the licensing process is. We've also encouraged them to consider hiring somebody that already has it. But that's their choice. We can't force them to do that. But in this sort of interim period, people that are going through red lights or people who are speeding through school zones are doing it without any repercussions.
I believe that's why we have that item number 4.
That is why.
Future.
Is
Yeah, so we
that-
get explanation.
That's what that is,
Is that
yes.
the only thing they've done to us this year?
Well.
In this arena? I mean, you don't have to answer now, but I just thought,
Or in public safety
yeah, for
issues.
any public
Well,
safety
I
issues.
think I think when you look at sort of what's coming, we believe that what's coming not only in Arizona but nationwide is a full legalization of marijuana. We just seem to be on that track. We're not at that point, but we seem to be on that track. And that would have some implications on the jail and the citations and all of that too, if we get to that. Other than that, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but
Okay. Thank you.
keep you apprised.
But if there's anything, we can always bring that up.
Yes, sir.
And put that on the agenda.
Yes, sir.
The other thing is, I noticed that we haven't had fire up here for a while, so maybe we can have a report on water safety and upcoming. Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? With that, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you so much for attending.
Good meeting.